Hey everybody, how you doing today? I'm the Jazz Shepherd. My name is Dan. This will be part 13. We're in the Chicago labels now. We just covered Argo last session. Now we're on to the great Emarcy record label. And Emarcy is the jazz sister. The jazz sister of Mercury. Sorry, Mercury starts out as a pretty small independent thing, but they'd grown to a giant pretty quickly. I guess they created a second record press in St. Louis, so they were distributing records to the south and the west, and then out of Chicago to the whole east coast and center of the country. It makes their reach pretty broad pretty quickly, which is an important aspect of getting the jazz message out there. And remember, the jazz message is more than just about music. A lot of this music, the importance of it is it's bringing us together as human beings. It's putting aside race, and Emarcy is an interesting experiment and study into that. One of the things we saw on the East Coast with labels like Savoy and Bethlehem was that the immigrants that were in those areas were also making jazz music. They felt this music that the blacks were making, and somehow they felt they could voice some of their feelings as well about being here and the struggle that this was. And so you saw a lot of Italians on the Savoy label, and the Bethlehem label, the Conte Condoli, Frank Rosolino, Al Caiolas, Charlie Mariano's. There's a lot of jazz cats that are Italian from that East Coast, because it's a very Italian area, and they had a struggle as well. And you see that today in rap music. Most of the white rappers are coming from the poor neighborhoods. It's because they feel that same condition and can relate to that black experience. So here in Chicago, the immigration here is much different than it is in New Jersey and New York. And while you still have Italians and Jews, you have a lot of Poles and Germans, Scandinavians, and that's going to be reflected in the Emarcy Mercury label. And you're also selling records to those groups of people. So you want to make music that is they're going to be willing to purchase. And maybe if they like their countrymen doing this music, maybe they'll buy the black and the other cultures as well. So there's an assimilation, there's a history of immigrancy and migration that jazz reflects crystal clear. Just some of these names alone will tell you some of the story. Lars Guillen, Max Bruhl, Bernard Pfeiffer, Jorgen Rieg, Georgie Auld, Pete Rugolo, Maynard Ferguson, the great French Canadian, Herb Geller, Ralph Gary, Charlie Ventura, Lars Guillen again, Maynard Ferguson again. So again, you're seeing a much broader dissection and representation of the American experience in Chicago, and they're really reaching out to a broad spectrum of this new American urban experience that is Chicago. The second thing I want to talk to you about Emarcy is they're quietly the second or third greatest label in jazz in this moment. And the singers that they record in this late 50s era are among the best. Helen Merrill, everything she does on this label, priceless. And they're priced accordingly. Kitty Wells has a couple records on this label, fantastic. Again, another Helen Merrill. The great Dinah Washington, she must have 15 records in the early Emarcy sequence. The great Sarah Vaughan. There's not a lot of gals that sing like her, you know, many tried. Another Helen Merrill early on. More Dinah. The great Billy Eckstein has quite a few records here. More Billy. More Billy. More Dinah Washington. So you're seeing some of the great American singers documented here on the Chicago label, and that's another great legacy of what they're doing. There's some other great names. Paul Kinneshay, fantastic player that we hear too little from. The great Clark Terry, another guy with Argo and Emarcy connections here. Joe Gordon, this record cooks, man. What a great trumpet player. We sadly don't hear enough from him. And then, one of the great Chicago talents, of course, Cannonball Adderley. His early records here on the Emarcy label are fantastic, and people kind of skip over and dismiss Cannonball. They think his Blue Note one record and his Capitol stuff is somewhat weaker, but those Emarcy records are fantastic. Then his brother Nat also has a couple records fairly early on here in the Emarcy. These are all the pre-100 series. You also see Quincy Jones with Roy Haynes here made a record. Max Roach starts showing up, and of course Max Roach leads us to what? The most important reason to recognize why Emarcy is one of the great labels of this period, the great Clifford Brown and Max Roach Quintet. And now every one of these sessions is of legendary importance. Great players. Clifford Brown, for me, is the greatest player ever. His ability to play at a high tempo and a slow tempo is unrivaled. A lot of guys can play slow, but you get them on a fast tempo and they're out. A lot of guys can play fast, but you put them on a slow tempo. Don't matter where you put Clifford Brown. You can put him with strings doing ballads. You could have him in a race car. He will kill you. He will destroy you. His strength in his embouchure is incredible. The way he can enunciate every tone when he's doing these long, running on melodic, up and down roller coaster type lines. There's no one that plays like that. The trumpet's a very difficult instrument to play. He makes it sound effortless. He rips through these long, they're just rolling, they're melodic, they're beautiful. They never lack rhythm, tone, or melody. Never. And very few cats can say that. Most cats are going to squeak once in a while and have an awkward rhythmic moment. But golly, his foot's tapping the whole time as he's ripping through all this stuff. Clifford Brown is a giant. Emarcy, Mercury recorded them, their most important sessions. Emarcy, Mercury should deserve more praise than they're given. And maybe because it's not the great New York City family of musicians, and it's a small second tier, maybe a half step down, there's still a lot of great players here who ended up moving on to New York, guys like Johnny Griffin. You know, it's important stuff. The price is always much more reasonable than a lot of the New York stuff. So you can get a lot of these records. And like I said in the Argo episode, just because you don't know a name, if it's on an Argo, if it's on an Emarcy, if it's on a Contemporary, if it's on a Blue Note, it's on a Prestige, they don't record bad musicians. You know what I mean? Everybody who makes a record on these records, on these labels, can play to some degree. Some are better than others, of course. And they can obviously only talk about their own experience. But the Polish, Jewish, Italian immigrant experience in America has very difficult moments in it as well, as any new immigrant group today can tell you. And so part of why there was a pushback against jazz is because jazz was going to create this empathy, this kind of community where we were experiencing each other and speaking the same language, and suddenly we start to share some understanding of each other, and there's power in understanding, there's power in unity. The great urban experiment of New York and then Chicago was the first time the world ever got into the same space at the same time, and jazz captures that moment. That's important. The newspapers don't capture it, they capture what the elite want you to think of that moment. History channels can give you a perspective with a degree of truth to it. But the captors and the winners of these struggles and wars are still going to be telling and narrating the story, as to not make themselves implicated. A jazz musician's brutal honesty, that searing, visceral tone that's screaming at the cosmos saying, I deserve better than what I've been given. I've sacrificed so much. Where's my piece of the pie? How come my kids don't have clean water and education? How come my kids don't have health care? And we still fighting that today. See what I'm saying? So jazz is ever relevant. Jazz is ever now in the moment if you open up your heart to the empathy of it. Emarcy is incredibly important. Jazz was one of the great things that unified and brought us together. And they've been trying to push us apart ever since. Don't let them do it. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. keeping my flock of records together. I got to start moving soon, so I'm going to start packing some of this stuff up. Well, once I'm done moving, we'll start round 2. I'm going to try to finish up my West Coast label starting next week with Fantasy, Contemporary, and Pacific. And then we're going to do an episode that touches on all the major labels and just look and show you how watered down and safe what Capital, Decca, RCA, and Columbia are doing compared to what these smaller regional labels are doing. And remember, Mercury is a bit of a mid-tier, and they grow quickly into a fairly major player. But these early Emarcys, they're taking chances. They're risking it by saying, yeah, Clifford Brown, do your thing. Yeah, Cannonball, speak that stuff. So buy Emarcys when you see them. They switch over to the Mercury sequence at some point in like early 60s, and then eventually go to a whole new number sequence. So it's a little bit tough to understand. But if anything in the 3600 series up to 36150, it's going to be great stuff. They sneak a lot of compilations in there. You know what I mean? Here come the saxophones, here come the trombones, albums that are just themed and sampled from different sessions. They do a lot of that. But even those are worth having. Often they're really affordable. So y'all have a great day. Have a great weekend. Peace, safety be with you all. Be blessed. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. Peace.